Anything over 90 is hot. All it is just hotter. There's no degree of heat that would make a person comfortable once they become warm. So best in any situation, like I said, water, stay in the shade, and don't move if you're outside.
Phoenix has been hotter longer than any other big U.S. city, a record 30 straight days of highs above 110. It's had a lot of us in the rest of the country asking, how does anybody live in that heat? A Galapagos tortoise, a rhinoceros, an eagle owl. The unrelenting sun high above Phoenix seems to be taking its toll on all living things. It's proving even too much for the iconic towering cacti, designed by nature for the desert heat. Among the most vulnerable are those without housing.
I cry all the time. I like yell at the heat till I go away.
Some of the friends that I've made down here, they come check on me if they don't see me moving around. Say, hey, get up, you want some water? I'm like, yeah, I'll get some water. They see me drink some water and they'll leave me alone. This is a game changer for me. I'll sit like this for hours, fan myself.
Charitable groups like the Salvation Army do what they can.
Some ice-cold water, a hat, some sunscreen, anything like that is a lifeline for people in need that are living here out in these conditions.
Parked air-conditioned city buses are pressed into service as makeshift cooling and hydration centers.
Everybody just wants to be cool. Everybody wants to be out of the heat. They're in here relaxing, sleeping. It's just quieter than the library. It's getting to the point where you can't take enough off. Because even if you're butt naked, it's hot.
Ice and water, as much as like the food helps and the clothes help and all of that, the only way to stay a little bit cool is by having something to keep your food cool, something to keep your water cool. The temperatures are just crazy.
The city of Phoenix has a heat czar, an office that looks at how to help people deal with the heat. They're responsible for things like the white pavement that's supposed to lower temperatures. And the office also helps coordinate heat relief centers. A lot of those are run by charities and third-party providers. But the city admits the people who need those cooling centers the most, people who are on the streets, people with nowhere to live, don't always know where they are.
The traditional channels do not reach everyone, and the city doesn't reach everyone. In terms of preparedness for this weekend, we've really been trying to flow information out to some of our key city partners about exactly which locations are available. So when they are in contact with people in the public, particularly our unsheltered neighbors, they are informed about where these resources are.
We offer spaces like this where people can come indoors. It's air conditioned, it feels cooler. We hand out tons of water, bottle after bottle of water, trying to keep people hydrated. We will see, though, if this continues, we will see more heat-related deaths because it is a life and death situation.
Even quick contact with the ground here, which can hit 180 degrees, may cause first-degree burns. And at the Arizona Burn Center, officials say more than a third of the beds are occupied by patients with surface contact burns.
We've been overwhelmed. Emergency room physician Frank Lovecchio has treated some of those people who didn't make it.
We've seen temperatures of many people 107 and greater, but we had to put them in ice baths to try to save their lives. Unfortunately, not everyone got saved. So heat stroke is the one that we never want. You know, hard for us to treat, hard for the patients, and if you're at that temperature for more than 5 minutes or so, brain damage, certainly organ damage is very, very high likelihood.
Overall, 202 people have lost their lives to the heat in 2023, and 356 cases remain under investigation.
Now, as I'm getting older, I think it's affecting me more.
Have you ever thought to yourself, well, maybe, it'll get too hot for me at some point?
Yes. I'm thinking about it.
You're thinking about moving?
Thinking about moving, yes.
School is back in session in Tempe, and at Marcos Deniza High School, for the first time, there are cool zones to help students weather the heat.
It's nonstop.
Here are the latest headlines.
NewsHour correspondent Stephanie Tsai.
It is after 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, and it is still 105 degrees. My air conditioning unit went out about 3 hours ago. Nobody's called me back. So this is life.
What we can tell in projections, customers are using about 10% more energy.
SRP says that's really due to the increased heat. The utility company knows some people may be getting a July bill that they just can't afford. For some, they can help set up payment arrangements.
They may have had something else happen, so it's more than just the summer bill. We have a group called our Customer Resource Counselors who work with community action agencies, and we can help connect customers to resources that are available in the community.
SRP says they have representatives who can also provide tips that may help lower energy usage. Their biggest message, don't panic.
Our number one tip is to reach out to us.
Phoenix, Arizona's streak of days at over 110 degrees Fahrenheit ended on Monday. It had been 31 days since the mercury soared to abnormally high levels with a heat dome parked over the U.S. Southwest.
In Phoenix, the average temperature so far this month has been nearly 103 degrees, 7 degrees higher than normal, forecasters say, and expected to break the previous all-time monthly record of roughly 99 degrees set in August 2020.
Recently, the World Meteorological Organization has released information actually just ahead of the United Nations COP28 climate change conference that's happening now in Dubai. And the WMO said that this will be the hottest year on average in human history. We're going to end this year with the average temperature being about 1.4 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial era. And the reason that that is significant is we are now reaching the critical threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial temperatures, which is set forth in the Paris Climate Accord as a critical threshold beyond which we see the acceleration of climate impacts and some of the worst effects.
Something that actually was to be expected, that we keep warming the planet because we are not taking the actions that would stop warming or would even go into a slight cooling. So from that perspective, it was not surprising. What is a bit surprising is the amount of warming, because the previous record was about 1.02 Celsius, about 2 Fahrenheit, and we wanted to stay actually, according to the Paris Accord, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we wanted to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now with 1.48, we are pretty much there. And that rapid increase, that was a bit of a surprise. The fact that we are keeping warming, that was to be expected.
Outdoor workers. So think about agricultural farm workers in Arizona who are having to provide food and fiber to support society, and they're working in increasingly extreme temperatures. So thinking about protecting those who are overburdened and underserved is a really important component about our climate action strategies.
I'm convinced that we will pass through 1.5 degrees Celsius. The question is, how close can we stay to it so that eventually we can actually turn that around and can come back to 1.5. We will go into what we call an overshoot period. The question is, how much? Are we increasing above 1.5 and for how long? In principle, we know what to do to stop global warming. We are just not fast enough in implementing the actions to do it.
Yeah, I think if we look locally, and that's where we're going to see these impacts, and it's also where we're going to be able to make the changes. But we saw a month of temperatures above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And part of that equation is climate change, and we can't ignore that. So we have to think what can we do about that? What adaptation efforts can help us protect people's lives today? This isn't a future problem. It's here today. It's been here for a while, so we can't leave it to the future to make solutions happen. So there's a lot of action already happening on the ground to protect people from the heat and other climate hazards that our region sees. There's other places globally that are looking to Phoenix and what are we doing? What's working? We're kind of this living laboratory for understanding the impacts of heat, the strategies to mitigate heat or other climate hazards that we face here. What's working? And so we can think about just something simple like social cohesion and working together and protecting our neighbors when there's a heat wave in place, or other strategies with respect to heat outreach efforts and what the city is doing to mitigate and respond to the increasingly negative impacts of extreme heat.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Associate Vice President and Chief Alliance Officer for the Global Futures Laboratory, Kelly Barr.
There we go. Hi, thank you. Boy, that was kind of an interesting juxtaposition between that video and the previous video, wasn't it? I'm going to ask the panelists to join me, and as they make their way up to the front, I'm going to introduce each one of them. First, we have, come along, Patricia. You can go first. She's the Executive Director of the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience in the Global Futures Lab. She's an Associate Research Professor of Geography in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. She's the co-founder and director of Youth Mappers, where 401 university campuses in 76 countries map hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, and of course, heat. And of interest to us today, I think, and I'm hoping she'll spend a lot of time talking to us about it. She was recently asked by Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs to prepare a report of recommendations to inform the first whole government approach to heat preparedness. Please welcome Dr. Patricia Solís. They're trying to figure out who's next. It's Mary. Please welcome Mary Muñoz Encinas. She's an education, arts, and sustainability practitioner who currently serves as the project coordinator for ASU's HeatReady Initiatives. These initiatives are aimed at advancing heat readiness and resilience efforts in the school, neighborhood, and city levels. Mary creates tailored learning experiences to creatively raise awareness and support efforts on preparedness, adaptation, mitigation to extreme heat risks. And last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Jennifer Vanos. You saw her in the video. She is a senior global future scientist and associate professor in the School of Sustainability. She focuses on extreme heat, thermal comfort, and air pollution in her research. She examines health impacts, particularly on vulnerable populations, which we're going to talk about today. She's currently running numerous field projects and collaborates with schools, government, and nonprofits in community-based research. So please welcome Dr. Vanos. You know, when I was asked to moderate this panel, I jumped at the chance because, you know, at ASU, we put a lot of stock in having an impact. And it's something that we all draw together around, and we're very excited about. These women are having an impact in this space. So while the juxtaposition of those two videos was a little disconcerting, when we're done with this video, I'm going to assure you that these women are having an impact and making a difference. And so it's a much more positive, hope-filled message than perhaps the video might have led on. So with that, we'll get started. It was a sobering video, and it's heartbreaking. And so I'm going to ask each one of you to first talk a little bit about just your initial thoughts after seeing that video, as well as the work that you're doing in the community. Obviously, you are working with communities that were depicted in this video. I'd like to understand how that work has impacted your work. So Patricia, why don't we start with you?
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. You know, the first thing that I think of when I saw this video is how ASU assumes fundamental responsibility for the people that we serve. and we want to do research of public value. So this is what drives me personally and what I think drives my team at the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience. And in addition to what you saw up there, people who are experiencing homelessness, being extremely vulnerable to heat, I don't think that that's the whole story. People who experience housing, which is not, they cannot keep cool, is also another group of people that we're already seeing being affected. And when you start extrapolating out the amount of heat that we're expected to be getting, when you move the dynamic of climate change into the equation, I think it's going to be a little bit like what we experienced with the pandemic, that none of us are going to be unaffected by this. We are all going to be experiencing these things differently, and so starting with some empathy now, I think, is a really important place to start. I work with people who live in mobile homes and trailer parks, and we're already seeing a disproportionate number of heat-associated deaths among those communities as well.
Mary? All right. Yeah, it works. Well, the video is very poignant, right, and pointing out that, yes, this is a very pressing issue. I think, however, that just like Patricia said, it is not the full picture. When we engage with these communities, we try to do it in a desire-based or needs-based approach versus a damage-driven approach. Dropping an Eve Tuck reference, everybody should read Suspending Damage. And we really have to center their voices. We have to humanize them, because extreme heat can be a very abstract problem. It's not as visually striking as a hurricane or a flood. Somebody sees it as, you know, a silent threat. But through these stories, we see the actual impacts that are going on. And there are many, many ways that this, you know, presents itself in the world. So part of our work is really getting to know these stories, connecting with these people. And it's not an us and them. We're all in the same storm, just in a different boat.
Dr. Vanos?
Yeah, and I'll kind of build upon what Patricia and Mary just said around humanizing the issue. And it's not, it can feel very far away for a lot of us who are sometimes in this room freezing and need an extra sweater. When those situations are happening where people are living day after day after day in those conditions, and even being out there for a couple hours doing heat outreach, you just wonder, how can they survive this? And then we study that how. But I think a really important piece of this is understanding the human aspect, and then what is the role of resources and adaptive capacity across our population. So we might have a lot higher adaptive capacity in terms of how to cope with heat than a lot of the populations that we're most worried about, and we need to support and study. But if we think about the record-breaking number of deaths that happened last summer, and it's kind of just been increasing each summer, something that I think is important to share is just that to humanize it, and to, these people are real people. So I wanted to read a couple examples of people who died. This was from a few years ago. The Arizona Republic did a really nice article called The Human Cost of Heat. And it's not only people who are unhoused that are struggling. Like Patricia said, people are housed but don't have the resources they need. But this is what I think of when I watch these videos and think about, where do we need to put our efforts and solutions. Mary Achenbach was 79, and her skill once earned her a Senior Olympics title. And she died inside her home, her apartment, measuring 100 degrees plus when her body was discovered. Caitlin Daniel was only 14, and she was known for being the most uplifting person in middle school. And she died on a hike with her grandmother in Australia Mountain Park in Goodyear due to environmental heat exposure. They covered 50 people's lives this way, humanizing who they were, what they did, what they meant to the world, what they meant to their family. And I think that's really important to think about, not just with heat, but other disasters. And then the other difference of heat when we compare it to something like the shock of a hurricane is that we're dealing with this for months and months on end. So the response is very different. So to ask the city and other NGOs to open up cooling centers is not just a 3-day thing, like it is in some other cities, or to open up a convention center after a hurricane. It's a 31 to 90-day or more ask. And that's a very different problem than when we deal with hurricanes and other shocks to our cities and systems. So I think that thinking about this press is important versus the shocks that are much more visible to us. So for us, it might just be this, it's an annoyance, it's an inconvenience to our lives, but for others, it's a complete disaster and potential life ender. So that's a lot of what I think about when I see that and when I'm doing my research.
Terrific, thank you. Jennifer, you mentioned that we had 31 days of above 110 degrees. We had 55 days total of about, so to your point, this is a summer long, because quite frankly, it's not a big difference between 105 and 110, shall we say. It's just really hot. So talk with us a little bit about the projects you're doing right now, because we're just getting ready to start this summer, and we know what we're in for. What kinds of things are we doing right now to help address this problem this summer?
Do you want me to go? Okay. It's always hard. What projects are you doing? Where to start? I'll think of one that's very top of mind that deals with this issue. We are doing the first pilot experiment to actually physiologically monitor people as they come in off the street from maybe sleeping on the street in a tent or sleeping in substandard conditions into a respite center to cool off. And we will monitor them and their core temperature and their heart rate and their skin temperature and their hydration status and see what is the state they're coming in and how long does it take for them to reach a state of safety where then, because they want to go back out and do what they were doing. And oftentimes they have that question, how long do I have to stay? And a lot of these places are not shelters that they can stay overnight. They're going to be closed at 4 or 5 p.m. And so trying to answer just some of those questions that no one's ever tried to look at before is one of our projects with the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience. I'll let Mary answer more of our HeatReady projects with neighborhoods and schools. But that's one of the ones that sticks out the most that relates to some of what we saw and how we can better protect some of the most vulnerable, because you can think about your core body temperature going up and down, and for us it remains pretty stable over the day, but for these populations it's going to go up and down, and like the doctor on the video said, once you get up to that heat stroke level, maybe it's 108, 109 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when you start to experience the potential organ damage, brain damage, and potential death, and we have to prevent that from happening and understand how long someone needs to cool off before they go out and continue on their everyday activities, which if you talk to somebody in those conditions, they want to continue doing what they were doing, whether it's outside or inside. They had a goal in mind, a task for the day that they want to achieve, and that often means being outside, standing, waiting for buses and so forth, and they'll continue to do that. So it's understanding their own time activity patterns as well and what's important to them in their lives.
Thank you, Dr. Vanos. Mary.
There we go. So I am working along with these lovely women on the HeatReady Initiatives. City of Phoenix has their HeatReady Phoenix office, the Office of Heat Response and Mitigation, and as the name implies, they are addressing the extreme heat risks across the city. Here at ASU, we have HeatReady Neighborhoods and HeatReady Schools. HeatReady Neighborhoods goes into a community and essentially facilitates the connection between neighbors, strengthening mutual aid networks so that in the event of a heat emergency, everybody knows where to go, who to connect with, who's going to check in with the elderly. It really emphasizes on leveraging the heat resource shed or the assets that already exist in a community. For HeatReady Schools, that's kind of our biggest project right now. It's ever growing. We're in over 40 schools across the valley. This program was developed with health officials, school staff, nurses, community members to identify what does a heat-ready school look like. So we go and make an assessment in the areas of environment, which means infrastructure, do we have enough shade, cooling areas, water stations, prevention and training for staff and for students to address and identify, again, those heat-related illness symptoms. We also work on community and communication. Schools are hubs for the community. We are not only serving the students and the staff, but residents around the schools, again, those neighborhoods, and the families, right? So if everybody coalesces there, everybody gets on the same page, we can prevent those heat-related illnesses. And we have to remember, young people, students, don't have the same ability to cope with heat stress as we grown-ups do. So these are the sort of topics that we reach with them.
Thank you, Mary. Dr. Solís.
Well, first of all, let me say how proud I am to be working with Jenny and Mary. They're just amazing people. And the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience, we have about 24 people working on projects like this. We have 35 fellows this summer who will be working on all sorts of, different work. And I think you can see there's an attention to both the biophysical and the environmental, sciences, as well as social sciences and communication. I think that this is really important. I think ASU is one of these places where you can see that kind of integrative research happening. And the other piece of it that we've been moving much more recently into is sort of the policy impact, right? Like, how do we take these kinds of learnings into our systems? One of the things that really, really drives me is that the responses so far are pushing the responsibility of keeping themselves cool to the people who are suffering the most with the fewest resources. Yeah, we're all in these same kinds of systems. And how do we change those kinds of systems? Because if we want to move the needle on heat, let's fix some of the housing issues that we have that will help all of us. If we want to move the needle on education and awareness, let's work in our school systems, let's work in our education. So those are the kinds of things that are really driving me, and this is also because I'm on the heels of having just released our report of recommendations to the Office of the Governor. As you may remember, last September, the Governor's office declared a heat emergency and released some important resources for the community a little bit late into the summer, but was still very much needed, and called for Arizona's very first statewide heat preparedness plan. There is an executive order, which I think I have memorized at this point, 3 pages, and 10 state agencies that are supposed to work across those silos together and create an interagency resiliency forum. So I was asked to bring in our team and University of Arizona, all the stakeholders, NAU, the whole community really, to find the best ideas for what to tell the state really needed to happen. We distilled that into, thank you very much, 45 well thought out recommendations on the timing, which state agencies need to do them, and many of them are statewide. A lot of them have to do with these kinds of systems: housing, workforce, data systems, knowledge systems. Yes, we planted a few seeds for us here at ASU to follow on. That's what I'm hoping to follow on. And very happy to help you, get access to this book. And let me say too that we submitted this in January, but we held on to it because we wanted the state to distill that and see what was reasonable in an actual plan. They released their plan March 1st, as the executive order had stated. And then just 2 weeks ago, we went to Washington, D.C. at a federal heat policy summit where we had about a dozen federal agencies there. Kelly, you were there. Where we were showcasing what Arizona is doing. Because those numbers, those heat-associated death numbers, would be far, far greater if our state and our community has not already been coming together around this. So we wanted, my goals coming up, what I'm going to be working on, is really trying to dig into this and work with the Governor's Office of Resiliency to see how their plan is unfolding. Where do we need to maybe instigate some of these recommendations, and work with, get this, the U.S.'s very first state-dedicated chief heat officer, which they took from our recommendations and named Dr. Eugene Ilivar.
Who's amazing. If you haven't met him yet, he's incredible. So I have high hopes. All right. Well, In 10 years, we hope not to showcase a video like the one we just saw, but have a totally different video where we have implemented the governor's report and we have made a lot of changes. What kinds of things do we need to be doing now to ensure or enable that kind of future? Let's start over there with you, Jen.
Oh, this is always the hard question, but I really enjoyed the video that Ed shared, and thinking about, you know, the narratives of the future we want, and then what does that look like for extreme heat. We live in the desert. It's hot here no matter what. The temperatures are rising due to climate change, plus a combination of the way we design our cities. And so we kind of live here and accept that and know, you know, we deal with it for a few months of the year. But what needs to be done to make that sustainable, especially with the growing population? I think I just saw somewhere that Phoenix is the #1 place people are moving to. Like, oh God. Okay, so how are we going to support that? We think about water, we think about energy, what's being done. I think it's really important to look at what's been working and continue what's been working around sustainable cooling and making sure that the way we are retrofitting and building it continues to use less energy and put less heat into the environment. But if we think about the most vulnerable populations, I think it's turning to, and it's not going to be planting trees. Unfortunately, I love trees. Trees are great, but it's going to be thinking about social issues and why do we have counts in the 8,000 to 10,000s of people at one time experiencing homelessness in our county or in our cities. How do we tackle that? And it's not, I don't know how, but a lot of it is decreasing the heat exposures of people so that they don't get into this cascade of entering into heat strain and potentially heat death. We have to reduce the exposures of people to heat. That's the only way that anyone could ever survive in Phoenix. We couldn't even move here till air conditioning was created and we got the canal system up and running in terms of like large populations to settle here. But not everyone has access to the clean water and the cooling that should be a human right, similarly to having a comfortable sleeping spot. And so I think a lot of these social challenges around mental health, around the causes of homelessness, around housing and infrastructure are going to be some of the root solutions that then reduce exposures to keep people safe in the heat. And that's why working with Knowledge Exchange for Resilience and working across disciplines at ASU, and then of course reaching out to our stakeholders and finding ways to make research meaningful, but understanding what it is like to experience this on the ground, and what are the cities dealing with, what are the cities working on, what are their barriers to implementing these resources for their constituents in their districts. I think there's so much there that we may not understand, and until we understand that, it's really hard to make our research be as impactful as possible. So I think this is a really long-winded answer to your question, but we gotta keep working together, we gotta understand the challenges, and then hopefully in 10 years, we've better understood those challenges to create solutions that are really solutions, that aren't just something we thought of at our office desk and doesn't go anywhere, but that is going to be used to guide policy, like what Kerr is doing, to support the most vulnerable populations out there.
Every time, guys. I think Jenny hit the nail right on the head. We have to change the narrative, right? Like this video, once again, was very poignant in pointing out the challenges, the urgent need to find contextually appropriate solutions. However, we should focus on the things that are already working, right? What are communities doing to help each other out in the event of any emergency? How do we adapt this to the event of extreme heat? We talk about a lot of innovative solutions, right? We're #1 in innovation, yes, but what about maintenance of those connections between partners? What about maintenance of care? What about the maintenance of, just showing up. Once again, strengthening those mutual aid networks, and through that highlight these amazing ideas that people have. We also have to center all of our work in equity, social justice, and resilience. Resilience is another big topic, right? It just means how do we bounce back and make it better, right? At least in this context. Though we can think, disease is resilient because it keeps coming back. Poverty is resilient, so it keeps coming back. How do we change these systems? How do we think of them in a different way? And really engage in work that is, once again, desired, that is needed and wanted by the communities instead of imposing what we think or assuming what is best for them.
Patricia? So Kelly, this might not be what you were looking for. In 10 years from now, I do hope we're here. I hope we're talking about new problems, though. I hope that we are still here 10 years from now, that Kerr is still here, that Global Futures Lab is still here, growing, thriving, and doing this kind of work. As we all have been saying, I call it first mile questions, not build something here at the university and then throw it over the transom and see what happens in the last mile. We're trying to work at the first mile to ask the right question from the beginning in the first place. And there will be more of those questions in the next 10 years. And I hope that we're still here doing that style of work.
We will definitely be here. I didn't mean to assume we would not be here, Peter. We will be here. I guess with my utility hat on, for those of you who I don't know, I worked at SRP for 30 years before I joined Global Futures Lab. And I guess one thing that I would encourage all of you to think about doing is supporting your local utility. Because when I hear these women talk about these situations, and I see that video, I express a little internal gratitude to the utility workers who keep the power on, because it's clearly a major issue for the unhoused folks and people who don't have electricity or the resources to run their AC in the way they'd like. But if we had a long-term blackout, and I think many of you are familiar with this study, but if you're not, I'm just going to reiterate it because I think it's important and a little bit chilling. There was a study done actually by Dave Hondula and others, Dave from ASU, that looked, I believe, at Atlanta and Phoenix, and what was the other place? Detroit. And they found that if we had a 3-day blackout in Arizona, in Phoenix, in the city of Phoenix, we would lose 1 million people. People would be hospitalized. 1 million people would be hospitalized, and more than 10,000 would die. And so it is a very significant issue. The utilities, I want to assure you that they will work really, really hard to keep the lights on, but I think it's important for us to be aware of that kind of in the background and be supportive when the utilities are trying to site new solar or trying to add new resources, because they're trying to keep the lights on for all of us and the AC running. So that was a utility perspective briefly. So in the remaining time we have, I always love Earth Day because I think it's a time for us to kind of pause and reflect, think about what we are doing, us personally, to make a difference. I always get out my green jacket. I always wear it on Earth Day, or when I go to the Masters. You get that? Okay, good, good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each panelist to think about one thing that they would like you to do. Not the utilities, not the city, not other people, you to do to make a difference in this space. So with that, I'm going to start with you, Jen.
I think what I'm going to choose for this one is see how you can get involved in some type of heat outreach. It could be with the Salvation Army, it could be with one of the cities, not just to be another volunteer on the street, but to understand the issue a little bit better. It's pretty eye-opening, and it will change your perspective on things a lot.
Thank you. Mary?
Talk to your neighbors. Make friends. Talk to the people you don't agree with. Everybody experiences heat in a different way. So let's find out what they think. Let's find out how we can connect and help each other out.
I think it's still along the lines of solidarity, but I would add to all of that, what about some research solidarity? I mean, look into your own portfolio of the types of questions that you're asking and trying to answer, and find that spot where it really could reach to these kinds of issues, and then speak to some community leaders and explain to them what you're looking to do, and then listen. What is it that's really the most important thing to them? And finally, pivot or alter or add to your research in ways that will align it and guide it to this research of public value and taking fundamental responsibility for the people that we serve.
Perfect. And with that, we'll close the panel and wish you all a happy lunch. I think we're right on time. Thank you.